The United Arab Emirates is reportedly running a campaign to get Al Jazeera registered as a foreign agent in the US, effectively restricting its operations in the country. So, is media freedom at risk? And what are the limits to political lobbying? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. Shutting down Al Jazeera network was one of the main demands of the blockading countries when they cut off diplomatic relations with Qatar more than 2 years ago. Now, the United Arab Emirates is reportedly running a lobbying campaign in Washington to get the US government to force the network to register as a foreign agent. That would, in effect, brand it as a government tool, a claim Al Jazeera strongly denies and could restrict its operations in the United States. The news agency Bloomberg says a prominent law company, a law firm, was employed by the UAE to achieve this goal. This includes meeting congressional staff, White House officials and journalists and academics. It also involves UAE-controlled digital accounts and websites. Twitter suspended thousands of those accounts in September. There we are. Here we go. Let's bring in our guest. Joining us from Washington, Bruce Fein, a constitutional and international lawyer. On Skype from Vienna is Ravi Prasad, Director of Advocacy at the International Press Institute. And here in Doha, Mahjoub Zoueri, Director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University. Welcome to you all. Bruce, can I come to you first? How political is this?
Well, the Foreign Agents Registration Act is very political. The standards for registration are triggered by twofold elements. First, you have to demonstrate that the broadcaster is controlled, it receives orders from a foreign government. And secondly, you have to show that the broadcast is intended and likely to influence the public policies of the United States. Now, with regard to Al Jazeera, I believe only Al Jazeera English is available in the United States. So this inquiry that's been triggered by UAE is focused only on Al Jazeera English, not Al Jazeera Arabia or any of the other arms. Now, is it political? Yes. For example, in the last year, both Russia TV, called RT, Sputnik, its radio network, and China's television, CGTV, have been required to register as foreign agents, even though they've been conducting their operations for long years in the United States without any disturbance. There are strong efforts in Congress after the revelations disclosed in the Mueller report about foreign interference through the Russians in the elections to have those broadcast outlets listed, even though their operations have been unchanged for long years. The argument is, well, even if they're on paper independent of the government, in fact, behind the scenes, President Xi in China, President Putin in Russia really dictate what goes on those airwaves. So there is clearly a political element to it. We also know that when the new Attorney General, William Barr, was confirmed, he said he was going to upgrade the enforcement rigor, if you will, aggressiveness of the Foreign Agents Registration Unit. I supervised that unit when I was at the U.S. Department of Justice as Associate Deputy. In the past, it had not been very rigorously enforced, and because, in part, it does encroach on freedom of speech, and that's treasured under the United States Constitution. But with regard to the indictment of Paul Manafort and others for having not registered as agents of Ukraine, it could be an issue with regard to current matters relating to Rudy Giuliani and President Trump in Ukraine not having registered as foreign agents. It's far more on the target, on the front burner than it was in the past. So that's where we stand politically right now.
Ravi Prasad in Vienna, are these people trying to campaign against Al Jazeera English or campaign against freedom of the press?
To us, any effort to shut down Al Jazeera in America, or for that matter, any media organization in the United States or elsewhere, it is an affront to press freedom. We believe that every media organization has the right to exist and the right to free speech. And closing down, asking Al Jazeera to register as a lobbying agent of the Qatari government, that's ridiculous. Over the years, Al Jazeera has established its credentials as a media organization. It has covered areas of the world which are underreported by the television networks. It doesn't have to reestablish its credentials to prove that it's a media organization. There's no doubt about it. And in the past, Al Jazeera America existed. How can they even classify it as a lobbying agent? It is a genuine media organization, and we see this as an attack on press freedom.
Majub Zeri here in Doha. What is it about Al Jazeera English? Because Bruce is saying we are very specifically talking not about our Arabic colleagues, we're talking about Al Jazeera English. Let's be clear, we're all grown-ups, that's where we're sitting right now. What is it we do that bothers the Emiratis?
If we put things in a context, we have to remember that Al Jazeera as a network, started with Al Jazeera Arabic and now Al Jazeera English, have done a lot of, I would say, activities which, according to the Emiratis and Saudis and other governments, are very annoying. For example, the way how they broadcast about Arab Spring, the editorial board, the editorial line of talking about Arab Spring, the slogan is being used in the news, the way how Al Jazeera, whether Arabic and English, handling the stories. That is different narrative of what the Emiratis want, because they want to show the Americans, the Europeans, the English native people one narrative, which is a narrative which basically fits their own agenda or political agenda and their policies. So basically Al Jazeera English in the United States is showing different narrative, is showing different stories, elements, which basically contradicts exactly with what United Arab Emirates wants. Let's remember, United Arab Emirates against Arab Spring from 2011. It has been, designed its foreign policy since 2011 on the fact that, the status quo in the region should be maintained, and including, the freedom of speech should be controlled, the human rights should be maintained as it was before. So all of those elements actually being discussed within Al Jazeera context, and Al Jazeera is defending all of this in its, own slogan and the news and the stories. So if Emiratis will be annoyed by this, Saudis will be annoyed by this, and other governments. I am sure the others also, they tried before, but they failed to do so.
Bruce, coming back to you for a second, is the momentum behind this lobby movement growing? Because there are some people inside the Beltway who say under Donald Trump, the number of lobbyist companies has grown almost exponentially. So there's kind of a vacuum of accountability into which these lobbying companies are moving. And if they're well-financed, well-dressed and enthusiastic, they might get listened to.
That's possible, but I don't think in this case there's any evidence of that happening. I first want to clarify, however, that to register is not to shut down. Registration just means you have to disclose and present yourself as a mouthpiece of a foreign government. It doesn't mean you need to cease operations. For example, RT still operates even though it's registered. China Television still operates even though it's registered. So I just want to make that clarification. Secondly, with regard to the UAE, I know the law firm that they've hired, Akin Gump. Akin Gump has to register as a foreign agent because they are a mouthpiece of the UAE. And that has to be disclosed to all the people they communicate with, which means that their credibility is substantially diminished. I think that what happens here is UAE, I believe, is under a false impression, thinking that, if you can get a few members of Congress to say something, it means that there's going to be registration soon. It means that the lobbyists get huge amounts of money, but there's no indication that Congress at all is inclined to do anything adverse to Al Jazeera. Remember that if you want to take the touchstone example of the attitude of Congress towards UAE, it is these repeated votes on their interference in Yemen with Saudi Arabia. And on those occasions, you have very, very substantial majorities in Congress rebuking UAE. You're doing war crimes in Yemen. You need to stop. So that shows, in my judgment, that UAE is not in a position to carry sway in the United States Congress.
Ravi, coming back to you in Vienna, when you have a situation where, according to, I think it was MSNBC a little earlier today, they were citing an example where one particular federal agency took 9 meetings with one of these lobby organizations up to June of this year. Why do they react and open the door literally to the lobbying organizations instead of reacting to their own intelligence agencies?
Oh, well, as Bruce would know it better, there are so many lobbying organizations in the United States, and there's been an exponential growth in their number after President Trump took over. lobbying organizations have always existed in the United States. They've been always informed or lobbied with the US Congress, the departments of the US government, and they're supported by very deep pockets. So the federal agencies get their information, they rely on lobbies to gather information, but I'm sure they would do their due diligence to find out whether what lobbies are claiming is true. And as Bruce just said, lobbying by the United Arab Emirates, which is a bit, if you see, the Congress has already criticized them for their involvement in the Yemen war. It's not likely to go any far. They're lobbying against Al Jazeera. It's unlikely. But still, it is a surprise that they're trying to do this. And we would oppose it. We would write to the members of the Congress about this.
Mahjoub, would it be desirable or achievable to put what these lobbyists are trying to get to into context? The context being, and talking from my own experience here, when I got off a plane 4 years ago, somebody here at Al Jazeera said, Peter, there's no such thing as impartiality across the Middle East, across Middle East broadcasters, apart from where you are at the moment. Fast forward 2 years, there was a big report, I think it was the Washington Post, the New York Times, another report into 9/11. On the day that report was published, there was a very big, glitzy, glamorous TV news channel broadcasting in Arabic in this region saying, 9/11, that was done by Qatar. No, it wasn't. It never was. Qatar has never been put in the same sentence as 9/11, and yet it's broadcast in this powerful way because somebody someplace takes an editorial decision to, let's call it what it is, lie and broadcast an agenda as news.
Let's be frank. Targeting minds and hearts, that is one of the tools to affect policies. That was in the United States. Even in the United States, discourse and narrative has been used this in the last 20 years. Since 9/11, we need to target minds and hearts. And now what's been happening now, they want to affect the view towards Al Jazeera and Qatar, because in the last 2 years, Qatar has been targeted for different reasons. And as you mentioned at the beginning of this show, that shutting down Al Jazeera was one of the 13 demands basically proposed by the blockade countries. So Al Jazeera has been targeted, was important, target to those countries. And I think the slogan of Al Jazeera was really annoying on different levels, not only in the last 2 years, in the last 25 years. The way how they handle politics in the region, the way how they look at developments in the region, the way how they introduce development and in the world to the region, that's annoying some governments. And I think this is likely to continue, actually, regardless of what's happening now.
But this is not the only campaign the UAE has mounted against Qatar. Leaked emails appear to show its ambassador to Washington, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, has been part of a long-running campaign to label Qatar as a supporter of terrorism, a charge the Qatari government strongly denies. Then there's George Nader, a former advisor to the Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. According to media reports, he paid millions of dollars to support a Washington-based public relations campaign against Qatar. He paid this man, lobbyist Elliot Broidy, who reportedly pushed Mr. Trump to get rid of his former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who was believed to have intervened to prevent a Saudi-UAE attack on Qatar. Bruce, I mean, the stakes here are pretty high. Mr. Tillerson was seen as a voice of reason, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And that is why, in part, I believe, he was ousted by President Trump. President Trump made his White House available to the likes of Elliot Broidy, who was a deputy finance director at the Republican National Committee. And basically, Mr. Trump has shown, not only with regard to his attitude towards the UAE and Saudi Arabia, selling arms and looking aside when one of our residents, Jamal Khashoggi, and a co-journalist with you all, is assassinated with the direct or complicity of MBS. But the Ukraine is another situation where the president basically has said, I'm for sale. If you do things for me, investigate Joe Biden, here's an Oval Office visit, and you can get your $400 million in military aid or diplomatic aid. And I do think that the quid pro quo is known out there, and the foreign countries are responding to that. And they can do it with regard to offering Mr. Trump or his relatives very lucrative financial business opportunities. And what's happening with Qatar is that when it was shown that Mr. Tillerson was going to balk, he wasn't going to capitulate, he ended up losing his job. It's a little bit like what happened to our ambassador to Ukraine. She lost her job when she wasn't going to be a token of President Trump and go and make false claims about the need to investigate the Bidens. And that's unfortunate where we are at present, and is one reason why this impeachment campaign is being fueled.
Mahjoub, if this doesn't happen, this move to register Al Jazeera English in this particularly toxic way, might it not happen because of President Trump's son-in-law? He needs Qatari money. He needs Doha to buy into his peace plan for the Middle East, for the Palestinians, for the Israelis. Qatar is up there in the top 5 nations who give money to the Palestinian causes, just to be clear.
Yeah. I mean, again, we go back to the political context of the whole thing. I mean, there is no doubt that this administration, regardless what's been told, what has been told and what's been actually paid to the administration, they still believe that Qatar's role is important in a lot of files in the region, and they know that what Qatar has done when it comes to the Afghani file, when it comes to the Palestinians, when it comes to even to what's happened now in Syria and to the Lebanese file. So they know that what Qatar is doing. Let's not forget the Al-Udeid military base as well and its role in on security in the region. So they know the contribution of Qatar to the security of the world, and also to promoting the principles that the United States is defending, when it comes to the freedom of speech, freedom of the media, the principle of human rights. Those issues they are sharing with Qatar. I don't think so that will be easy for that administration to forget all of this and listen to the lobbyists.
Ravi, at the risk of sounding oversimplistic here, when it comes to being a US politician, is part of the toxicity of this debate to do with the name Al Jazeera and the associations with that name going way, way, way back, where George W. Bush, the then president, did put it out there that he might think about bombing certain Al Jazeera offices. And also, let's be honest about this, Bruce. I'll come to you, Bruce, with this in just a second, but let's stay with Ravi. Ravi, certain US politicians, if you showed them a map of the Middle East and said, point at Doha, some of them, I get the feeling, couldn't really do it.
Well, we have also to remember that Doha has a huge US air base, which was used during the Iraq War. And before that, during the first war in Iraq, and then later again when they started the operation. So Doha has been very crucial to military operations for the United States. But then there are politicians on both sides of the divide who would not know what contribution Doha has made for the US foreign policy. And as you just pointed out, Doha is quite high up in the list of countries that need to be on board for the Middle East peace plan. So it looks like the government, the United States government needs Doha and its support. And if it takes action against Al Jazeera, it would be counterproductive. But let me say something else, which Bruce just pointed out earlier, saying closing down Al Jazeera. What I meant was, if Al Jazeera has to register as a foreign agent, it curtails its freedom, because Russia today was forced to register as a foreign agent, and accreditation to its journalists was denied, and they can't access some of those White House or congressional briefings. So that would happen to Al Jazeera, and that would be unfortunate, because Al Jazeera is a genuine media organization. We all know about it. And that definitely impacts press freedom around the world and press freedom in the United States itself, which claims to be having the First Amendment that doesn't allow the US government to have laws against press freedom. So we have to see how it unfolds, but definitely politicians will play a crucial role.
On that idea of press freedom and what the media can or does not or chooses not to report, Bruce, coming back to you in Washington, if one channel hops, as I do habitually because I'm in the industry, but if you channel hop and you watch Russia Today, there are distinct moments when you go, that's the Kremlin. If you watch Chinese television in English, you go, that's the government in Beijing. I mean, is anyone in Washington in high places actually watching Al Jazeera English and letting the journalism speak for itself instead of listening to what these lobbyists are saying?
Unfortunately, no. I think you're right. This is driven by politics. It's not driven by an even-handed analysis of the speech, whether it's biased, whether it shows that it's independent or just an echo chamber of the government. You pointed out, I think earlier, what is driving the U.S. policy in the Middle East and towards Qatar. It's unfortunate, but you first have to ask, what is Israel's policy towards Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE? Our policies in the Middle East are overwhelmingly driven by who is in the prime ministership in Jerusalem for Israel and what their views are. And insofar as Israel gives a signal, no, isolate Qatar, we sort of turn around and follow the marching orders. Israel is the most important lobbying foreign country in the United States by far. And if you want to know if there's any momentum, why are these senators doing this, it would only because Israel gave them the green light. With regard in general to the freedom of speech, and if you analyze the programming, would there be any indication that Qatar was curtailing anything that was thought adverse to the Qatar foreign policy? I mean, I'm not on all the programming, but I've never been censored. I don't know anybody else who said that on programming, Al Jazeera tells them what to say. I do know that's not the case with Al Arabiya, programming by Saudi Arabia. But I do think that there's at least some assurance that even if there were a listing decision made, you would have an opportunity to challenge its legality in court, to show it was arbitrary, capricious, and based on ulterior political motives, not based on the programming and organization of Al Jazeera English.
And I suspect, Mahjoub, here in Doha, that this will never happen. If US politicians got an awareness of Al Jazeera Arabic, they would realize how popular it is. I mean, 40 million people
Absolutely.
dip into Al Jazeera Arabic.
Yes.
Okay, we're not talking about our colleagues in Arabic, we're talking about Al Jazeera English. But it's not because Al Jazeera Arabic is giving the viewers what they want. It's not Arabia's Got Talent and the X Factor and game shows. It's information and it's freedom of information.
Yes,
because
it's the platform.
It's a window of an open foreign policy.
It is the platform. It's the platform to listen to different views, to participate, to engage, to listen to the discourse which has been prevented for years and years. This is Al Jazeera Arabic. What is the important about Al Jazeera English? For years, people who are speaking English in the world, they listen to one narrative about the Middle East. Al Jazeera English comes to say and to deliver different narrative, to say different views about Middle East. That is the views from within the people in the Middle East, and they say about themselves rather than others describe what's happening in the region. The English, Al Jazeera English, has offered the platform to talk in English to the people in the States, in the United Kingdom, everywhere in English language about the Middle East, and to listen to the people's narrative rather than to the other outlets who have their own agenda, their perception of the region. And that is, I think, annoying others.
Let's just take the last word to Ravi Prasad in Vienna. Ravi, the first big foreign policy trip for this current US administration, Donald Trump went to Riyadh. He, in effect, green-lit the GCC blockade of Qatar. It kicked in very quickly after that initial visit. If he tilts towards Al Jazeera English having to register in this way, will it actually happen, do you think?
I doubt he will do that because of the geopolitical reasons. But if he does it, it will be extremely unfortunate. And we would protest. We will go to the Congress. We will use our International Press Institute's North America National Committee to raise this issue at every level of the government in the United States and oppose it. We'll take our partners, press freedom organizations and human rights organizations, to oppose this vehemently because asking Al Jazeera to register as a foreign agent would be one of the most ridiculous decisions of the government. Al Jazeera has established its credentials as a media organization, which I said earlier. It has brought reports from all over the world where many television and radio stations have not reported from or do not report from. It's the variety of shows that Al Jazeera has, and also the acknowledgement of its variety by number of awards it has received. In the United States, even last year, it received a couple of awards. So it establishes Al Jazeera is a media organization not a lobbyist firm, and therefore it should not be registered as that. And if that happens, we will take action. And we will take action now. We will write to the government, we'll write to the Congress, we'll write to the committee saying if they were considering this action, it is wrong.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you to our guests. They were Bruce Fein, Ravi Prasad and Mahjoub Zuheri. And thank you to you too for your company. You can see the show again anytime on the website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the chat on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, or tweet me, I'll tweet you back. I'm @PeterDobbie1. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the Al Jazeera English team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.